So I want to start off today's talk just by asking you a question, and that is, how's your relationship been with the news lately? I'm talking news articles, news broadcasts, maybe live videos that you see. Are you maybe checking the news every day or every hour, or have you kind of just stopped? Because it's a little difficult right now. Yeah, for sure. Have you ever read a news article or listened to a video, watched a video segment that just immediately filled you up with anger? Or maybe as you read or watch, you're filled with sadness and tears start to well up in your eyes because the story is just too heartbreaking. It's hard to even kind of wrap your mind around. Oh, that's devastating. Or maybe you feel this sense of shock and disbelief. Well, how can that be? And you're left just feeling kind of stunned, shell-shocked by what you read or what you watch. And if you're anything like me, you begin to feel this sense of unrest kind of in your gut. Something's not right here. That's not right. What that person chose to do was not right. How could they do that? Or those circumstances, they're just not right. How could that happen to a good person? There's this place deep down inside of us that reacts so strongly when we realize what really is the brokenness of the world that we live in. And as part of the human experience, we feel this brokenness on many different levels. We feel this brokenness on a cultural level. All you have to do, like I said, is look at the latest news to realize that something's not quite right with the way that our society functions. Stories of violence and deceit, hate, and abuse are all too common. We see racism and prejudice are just spreading like wildfire in our world, and hateful acts are being done every day on just a regular basis. And we think to ourselves, that's not right. It shouldn't be this way. An article from CBS News recorded that the year 2020 actually saw the highest number of reported hate crimes in North America since 2008. Man. And because of technology and media, I don't have my phone up here, but it's usually by my side. Because of our smartphones we carry around in our pockets or our purses, and we've never been more connected to the global community than we are right now. And as a result, these events are more accessible than they have ever been. I started thinking about this a little bit more, and I got curious, so I started Googling, and statistics show that 7 billion people in the world own a smartphone. That's over 90% of the world's population. We find out about world events minutes after they happen. Sometimes we even have access to live videos as something is happening halfway across the world, just at our fingertips. But in other words, the brokenness of our world has never been more apparent than it is right now. And so we feel this brokenness, like I said, on a cultural level, but we also feel it on more of a personal level. We have broken relationships in our families. Maybe you've gone through a painful divorce, or you have siblings that can't seem to see eye to eye, and you're stuck in that crossfire, not sure what to do. Or maybe you're sitting here and you've been dealing with years of abuse from your mom or your dad or your uncle or your auntie or a grandparent. Or maybe you have kids and your kids are in school and they're getting bullied, and that makes you angry, and rightly so, because that's not right. We know our own brokenness, and yet we're left with so many questions. Why is our world like this? What should we do about it? Can we do anything about it? And if you poke around mainstream media even a little bit, you'll come across this idea that human beings as a race can fix it ourselves. We can fix it with the newest developments in science or psychology, technology. Maybe if we just read the newest self-help book, we'll be able to turn this thing around. Or maybe there's a TED Talk out there, 5 ways you can fix your world when you feel it's falling apart. We adopt mantras and mindsets, and we're told that if we just think a right way, we'll manifest our ideal world into reality. And yet, suicide rates continue to rise, mental illness continues to impact each generation, obesity and addiction rates skyrocket, and these harmful cycles continue to be such a common part of our day-to-day lives. And the hard truth that becomes evident when we take a step back is that our world is not improving. Our world is broken. So where does that leave us? I haven't started us off on a very positive note here. Where are we now? If we agree that our world is undeniably broken and hurting, what should we do about it? Can we do anything about it? And is there anyone who can? Well, today we're going to look to the Bible as we continue to explore this topic. And the reason we're looking to the Bible is because it is God's owner's manual for life. That's a phrase we like to use around here. And what that means is simply that if we read what it says and apply it to our lives, it's going to help us to live life better. The Bible is also one big story about what God's love for his creation. And if you're interested in learning more about that, I want to encourage you to check out a series that we did in September called The Bottom Line of the Bible. You can check out that on our Facebook page, or you can go to YouTube and search FWC Equips, and you can watch all of those talks. I highly recommend going back and doing that if you haven't already seen them. The first passage we're going to look at is in the book of John, which is in the New Testament. And this book was written by a fellow named John, who was a close friend of Jesus. He was one of his disciples. And the cool thing is that John actually got to walk and talk with Jesus and knew him really well. Jesus, when he was on earth, was actually God in human form. So when John was having conversations with Jesus, he was actually talking to God. Imagine that. I don't know about you, but I have questions I'd like to ask God. Maybe you have a few of them. And the thought of being able to walk and talk with God in human form is pretty amazing to me. But what's even more amazing is what's recorded in John's gospel about God's love through Jesus. So let's read together. John 3:16 and 17. For this is how God loved the world. He gave his one and only Son, so that everyone who believes in him will not perish but have eternal life. God sent his Son into the world, not to judge the world, but to save the world through him. So in other words, if you've ever wondered about God's love, all you need to do is look at what he's done. God's gift of his Son is the evidence of his love for humanity. God gave his Son Jesus in order to save the world that he loves. And why did he feel like he needed to save the world by sending his Son? Well, because he saw the hurt, the pain, the hardship, abuse, the hate, in other words, the brokenness of our world, and his love compelled him to action. And God's plan here was that Jesus would be born as a human baby, live a perfect life, and then take on the heavy burdenness of the brokenness of this world on himself. And then because of his death and resurrection, we can now know God's love in an incredibly powerful way. How could this even be possible? It's blowing my mind. It was because Jesus was actually, like we said, God in human form. And even though he was God, he actually took time to talk to people. He had meals with people. He cared about the problems they were facing and the hurt they were feeling. And, if you read the Gospels, which are the first 4 books of the New Testament, you'll see that Jesus' love changed lives everywhere he went. And if you read a little further, you'll find that not only did he die a brutal death on the cross, but he rose from the dead, ascended back into heaven, and is still changing lives to this day. There's a common thread throughout all of history, and that is God's love changing lives through Jesus. And that's why Jesus is the only way for me. I've been changed by the love of God. I've been transformed because of Jesus' resurrection and the new way of living that's been offered to me. And, you might be thinking here, that's great for you, Emma. Thanks for sharing. But what about the topic of today's talk? If the evidence of God's love is Jesus' death and resurrection, then why are we even having this conversation? Does God actually hate sinners? And if he does, where does that idea come from? Well, we're going to explore that question in the next couple minutes. But first, I want to tell you a little bit of a story. When I was a kid, I didn't really enjoy watching hockey on TV. But I'll admit, it's really grown on me. I quite enjoy it. And I like the speed of the game. I like the passion of the players and the fans. There's no fans like hockey fans, hey? I just love it. I personally have never been a hockey player. These are actually my skates, and I bought them from Repeat Boutique last winter. And I'll tell you, I love to go skating, but as soon as you put a stick in my hand, I mean, my equilibrium is totally off, right? I'm all over the place. I'm all limbs. I already have long limbs, so I don't need any extra. But, when I was younger, I used to babysit for a family, and they had 2 little boys. And these little boys just loved hockey. They lived, breathed, ate, slept hockey. And so what would we do when I was babysitting? We would play hockey for hours and hours and hours. And in the wintertime, we'd be in the basement playing hockey. And, they were quite small at the time, so we'd have the mini sticks and the mini nets, and let me tell you, those sticks were flying. It was like, watch your eyeballs, it's a free-for-all, there's no rules, but they were having the time of their lives. And as far as I know, these boys are still playing competitive hockey to this day, and they're loving it. And I think that's great. And, one way of understanding where this idea of God hating sinners might come from is actually by looking at life as if it were like a hockey game. I know that might sound strange, but stick with me here. There are obvious differences between life and hockey, but there are some similarities as well. When we do something we know we shouldn't do, there are often consequences. We know this in life. There may not be anyone, blowing a whistle in your face and sending you to the penalty box, but you may think you've gotten away with it for a little while, but the thing about consequences is that they eventually sneak up on us. And the choices that we make, maybe years ago, eventually will catch up. And we know that in life, just like in hockey, our choices don't just affect us, they actually affect the people closest to us as well. If I get a penalty, the opposing team gets the advantage of the power play, and all of a sudden it's 5 against 4, and I'm watching my teammates from the penalty box. And just like in life, when I lie or I cheat, I hurt someone's feelings to make myself feel better, I'm directly affecting the people in my life. And you may be wondering where I'm going with this, but just stick with me, because the way that we understand this analogy is going to tell us a lot about how we see God and how we see ourselves. For instance, where do you picture God in the hockey game? Some people might say, well, God's not even there. He peaced out and he left the building. And maybe that's you today. Maybe you're not even sure that you believe there is a God, and that's okay. We're glad you're here. Others might say, well, he's there, but he's sitting up in the back seats, kind of watching the game, but he's not really involved. And maybe that's kind of where you find yourself today. Maybe you think, yeah, there's probably a God, but he doesn't really care about my day-to-day life. Or maybe you're thinking, well, God's the referee. He's skating around, making sure people do the right thing, and he's ready to kind of, blow the whistle. The passage we read in John earlier said that it was God's love that compelled him to take the brokenness of the world upon himself in order to save humanity. So, according to John, God's not the referee in the game. In fact, instead of doling out that penalty to the people who deserved it, Jesus actually served that penalty that was meant for us, himself. And I want to pause here for a moment, because when we begin to realize that God's not the referee, our behavior naturally starts to change. And first, we stop living like God's a gotcha God. What I mean by that is that instead of living in fear of what God might do when we mess up, we actually begin to live in the reality of God's love that changes us from the inside out. Understanding this part of God's character will radically transform the way that you live your life. If I'm not living in fear of what God's about to do when I make a mistake, then I'm actually able to receive God's love in a way that will help me to properly love the people around me. We know how to love because God shows us how to love first. So, how do I know if I'm believing in a gotcha God? Well, the best way to find out is to think about the last mistake you made. Now, I'm not talking about just one of those little mistakes like, oh, no problem, I forgot my keys at home. I'm talking about a mistake that really got you in the gut. It was like, oh, I made a mistake. What did you do? What was the first thing you did after you made the mistake? Did you immediately try to cover it up? Did you start making excuses for maybe what happened, or maybe start looking for the best person to blame? What did that look like for you? Just want to take a moment and think back. I ask the question because more often than not, our actions say a lot about our motivations. What's motivating the need to cover up that mistake? It's most likely a fear of what's coming when you get caught. Think about when you're a kid. What did you do if I spilled something in the kitchen. Better clean it up. Mom's going to come and see, or Dad's going to come and see. Love says, I made a mistake, and it's okay. But fear says, I made a mistake, and now I need to cover it up. So that's the first thing. The second thing that happens when we realize that God's not the referee is that we stop acting as if we, who are followers of God, are also the referee. What do I mean by that? Well, I mean that instead of being trapped in prejudice towards other people because of their choices or actions, we actually become free to love them like God does. All of a sudden, our walls come down and our capacity to love the world around us increases when we give up the right to blow the whistle on people we don't agree with. And I wonder if this is where the idea of God hating sinners comes from. Maybe somewhere along the way, Christians decided that if we believe that God hates sinners, then it's okay if we do too. And let's be honest, hating someone is a whole lot easier than loving them. But that's not how God sees people at all, and it's certainly not how God calls his followers to live. In fact, when we take time to read the stories from those who walked and talked with Jesus on earth, we begin to see that it was God's love for people, for his creation, and not hate or anger that motivated him to send his son to die on the cross. I mentioned earlier that the Bible is one big story about God's love for the world he created. And the more I read the Bible, the more amazed I am at the massive scope of the love of God. There's no distance too far, no depth too low where God's love can't reach. But let's revisit our hockey analogy for a moment. Who here is maybe an Oilers fan? Do we have any Oilers fans in the room? No? Okay. No. Big thumbs down. Okay. What about Canucks? Any Canucks? Oh, we got some Canucks fans. Okay, what about Flames? Any Flames fans? Okay, a little bit here. Awesome. So we're pretty widespread. Okay, we won't talk about that anymore. The hardest games to watch are the ones where your team is just falling apart. The players are struggling. Everyone's off their game. You just feel like pulling your hair out, right? And all of a sudden you start to wish you were cheering for the other team. And just like in hockey, this is where we can kind of run into trouble in our own lives. Have you ever caught yourself thinking, well, yeah, I make mistakes, but at least I'm not as bad as so-and-so. Or, well, I might not always get it right, but I'm not as screwed up as that guy. Whew, what a relief. There's something about being human that actually makes ourselves naturally want to organize us onto different teams. And of course, when we pick these teams, we often like to put ourselves on the good team. And maybe we might put other people on the bad team. Just stop and think about it for a moment here. When was the last time you were forced to interact with someone you didn't like? What thoughts were running through your head? How long did it take you to put them on the bad team? It's a good question to think about. But let's go back to the Bible for a moment here. There's another writer in the New Testament who had something to say about this, and his name was Paul. And in a letter that he wrote to his friends in Rome, he says this. Let's read from Romans 7, verse 19 to 21. I want to do what is good, but I don't. I don't want to do what is wrong, but I do it anyway. But if I do what I don't want to do, I'm not really the one doing wrong. It's sin living in me that does it. I have discovered this principle of life, that when I want to do what is right, I inevitably do what is wrong. Reading those verses makes me wonder which team Paul would have put himself on. I think Paul was picking up on something that's absolutely essential for us to understand here. And that is that you and I, this is what Paul's saying, are not naturally good people who occasionally do bad things like we might like to believe. No, Paul is saying here that we're naturally bad people who occasionally do good things. No, wait a second, Paul, you got some nerve telling me that. You don't know anything about me. Well, let's just think about this for a second. We agreed earlier that our world is broken. And I wonder if our world is broken because we who live in it are broken. And I think it's not until we actually fully embrace that we realize why God's love is like the oxygen that we breathe. At the heart of what Paul is saying here, he's really talking and getting at an identity issue. Paul is saying, I am not what I do. Because if I were to base my identity on the things that I do and the choices that I make, I'm always going to be coming up short. Paul's saying, I can't even put myself on that good team because when I try to do good things, I do bad things. And when I try not to do bad things, I do them anyway. And how relatable is this in the human experience? The most exhausting way to exist in this life is to try to prove that you're good because of the things that you do. I've been there. It's exhausting. And some of us try to do this in different ways. Maybe you've tried to climb the ladder of your profession and your career and try to prove that we're good enough that way. And that kind of leaves you feeling empty because the reality is there's always going to be another promotion and another Christmas bonus, and it's never going to be enough to prove that you're good enough. Or maybe you tell yourself, well, I have to give and I have to give and give and give and give to help other people. You might be giving of your time or your emotional energy and you feel like you can't say no because if you did, then somehow that would communicate that you're not good enough. You don't help enough. And all of a sudden, you're getting taken advantage of by the people in your life because you don't have good boundaries. And that can be a really painful place to be. Well, if we keep kind of digging into this a little bit deeper and we continue in the New Testament, we read that Paul, again, actually believes that there's a better place to find our identity in than what we do or what we don't do. So let's go to his letter to the Galatians, chapter 2, verse 20. He says this, "My old self has been crucified with Christ. I no longer live. It is I no longer who live, but Christ lives in me. So I live in this earthly body by trusting in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me." So Paul is saying here, listen, guys, I've tried being the good person, and the truth is that on my own, I'm not a good person at all. Paul's saying that our identity shouldn't be in what we do or don't do. The best place to find it is through God's love, as shown to us through Jesus Christ. He's saying, it's no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. In other words, it's no longer what I do or how I live that defines me. It's Jesus' love that defines me. And that's where I find my identity. When I look in the mirror, I see God's love reflected back at me. But here's the truth, friends. Paul was only able to get to this place by admitting that his old way of thinking wasn't working anymore. Remember, I said earlier that mainstream media wants to kind of tell us that we can fix it ourselves. We can fix our world ourselves. And Paul's saying, no. I can't fix this myself. The only way that I can fix my own brokenness is by receiving God's love for me as evidenced by what Jesus did on the cross. What a life-transforming idea. All of a sudden, the rat race of trying to prove that we're good people by what we do slows to a halt. I can't help but thinking that this one idea of God's love being our identity is how this one idea could change our world, could change the way we interact with the people around us, could change us. I want to kind of close here by just sharing with you one of my fondest memories from my childhood, and that is when my dad would coach my volleyball team. I loved sharing car rides with him, and we would travel to tournaments in the car, and I'd kind of pick his brain, and we'd just talk, and I treasure those conversations with him. And I remember kind of funny things stand out in my mind, like he used to bring a pack of gum to every game because he wanted to chew it, and if he chewed the gum, then he could kind of stay level-headed. It was something to kind of take his mind off. So I'd always say, "Hey, Dad, you got your gum?" He's like, "Yep, I got it, I'm ready," And then I remember, too, he used to say, "Okay, gang, gather around." And he'd get us together and he'd give us the game plan. And I love those memories. And I really hope that one day I'll be able to share those kind of memories with my kids and those experiences as well. And I share that with you today because I hope that as you've been listening, you're picking up on one really important thing. And that is that God isn't the referee waiting to blow the whistle on you when you mess up so that he can send you for that penalty. In fact, the best way that I can think of to describe God is actually a loving coach. One that takes you aside when you have a rough game and says, "Hey, I'm proud of you." A coach who doesn't lose his temper through the ups and downs of the game, but actually sticks it out with his players because he knows the potential that they have. A coach who's never going to walk out on you because he's committed to seeing you learn and grow. Guys, God isn't watching your life on edge or up in arms about what mistake you're going to make next. He's much more interested in helping you to grow and showing you a better way. And when we realize our own brokenness and we admit that we can't fix it on our own, and we receive God's love as the solution, we open ourselves up to God's transformational love and power in our lives. And it's only from that place of receiving God's love that we can truly begin to learn and grow. I mentioned earlier that the common thread throughout all of history is God's love changing lives through Jesus. And so if you've been listening here today and you maybe wouldn't consider yourself a Christian yet, but you'd like to learn a little bit more about how God's love might change your life, I would love to talk to you about that. If you're watching online, send us a private message on Facebook, or you're more than welcome to send me an email, emma@whitecourt.church. If you're here in the room, I'd love to talk with you after the service. Another thing I'd like to encourage you to do is actually to watch a video, and it's made by an organization called Alpha. Alpha is a ministry that's committed to giving people opportunities to learn and ask questions about life, faith, and Jesus. And the video that I want to recommend to you is called "Why Did Jesus Die?" It touches on some of the things we've talked about today, but it also dives a little bit deeper, gives us some more information about the brokenness of our world and why we actually need Jesus in our lives. So I encourage you to check that out. I've got the link in the live stream description, and it's also in your sermon notes. So please go ahead and check that out this week. And if you're listening here today and you would consider yourself a Christian, I want to encourage you to go back to that hockey analogy. And there's a few questions I encourage us to challenge ourselves with this week. Questions like, where do I see God in my own life? Am I seeing him as that referee ready to blow the whistle? Or have I been trying to play the referee? Have I been trying to blow the whistle on others in my life? Or maybe, have I been trying to put people on the good team or the bad team? These are some important questions we can ask ourselves. And, I've heard it said that God awareness and self-awareness are so interconnected that it's hard to see where one ends and the other begins. And these kinds of questions, like I just mentioned, are a great place to start developing an awareness of both how we see ourselves and how we see God. It's not an easy journey, believe me, I understand. But there's a lot of freedom that can come and be found when we take the time to ask these kind of questions. Like I said earlier, when we realize our own brokenness, we admit that we can't fix it on our own, we receive God's love, we open ourselves up to this transformational power in our lives. And as a result, we're never going to be the same. It's only from this place of receiving God's love that we can truly begin to learn and grow. And that's what we're about here at Family Worship Center. We want to learn more about what it means to follow Jesus and become more like him and become continually changed in our lives. So as we close, let's pray together and let's ask for his help in all of this. Can we pray? Well, Jesus, we've asked some hard questions today. And I thank you that your love knows no limits. There's no place too low, no place too far away where your love cannot reach us. And so I thank you for that today. God, I pray that as we continue to wrestle with each question, wherever we're at today, I pray that you would continue in your gentle, loving, and kind way to lead us into moving forward, discovering more about your love, discovering more about who we are in you, the incredible identity we can hold on to because of your love for us, and then all that you want to do in and through us to love the people around us. God, we ask for your help in all of this. We're grateful for your leadership. We pray this and all these things in your name. Amen.